Hey, it's Drew, and I've got some surprising news. Being a CMO is hard, really hard. But I've got better news. My guest today in a two-part series is Kim Whitler, who is an expert on CMOs and the assistant professor of business administration at the Darden School of Business. Anyway, we had a long conversation, so I've broken it up into two episodes. Here is part one.
Welcome to Renegade Thinkers Unite, featuring the sharpest minds in marketing, inspirational case histories, and weekly insights you can apply to your business. Find out why top CMOs rank this podcast among their favorites. Now, here's your host, Chief Marketing Renegade, Drew Neisser.
Hello, Renegade Thinkers. It's an amazing time to be a marketer, although it sure as heck isn't getting easier. But that's what makes it fun, right? Anyway, speaking of fun, we have a great show planned for you featuring Kimberly Whitler and a live audience of B2B CMOs who will get their chance to ask questions. Well, for those of you who don't know her, Dr. Whitler, yes, she has a PhD in marketing from Indiana University and is currently the assistant professor of business administration at the Darden School of Business. Now, this is important. She is an ardent ACC hoops fan, specifically the Virginia Cavaliers, and more than happy to give me grief about my Blue Devils. We'll be talking about that. Perhaps more importantly, she's written over 250 articles for Forbes, where you'll find her challenging conventional wisdom at just about every turn. The same holds true for all the other places she's published, including an oft-quoted piece in the Harvard Business Review called Why CMOs Fail. I met Kim several years ago at an IBM conference, which we were both attending as CMO influencers, and realized we shared a common interest, or maybe obsession, in the study of this unique role. Although I'm the first to admit she brings more academic rigor to her research, some of which we'll get to this show. Now, since I don't have an applause track, maybe the CMOs in the audience can bring a little welcome cheer to our guest, Kim Whitler. Come on. All right. Awesome. Well done, audience. Okay. So, Kim, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here with you, Drew, and with actually all the other CMOs. That's fabulous.
So, important question. I noticed the pre-season ranking. Duke was edging the Wahoo. What do you think? What's your prediction? You think the Wahoos will win the ACC this year?
I think this is going to be a very tough year for us. It's going to be a rebuilding year for sure. We lost 4 of our starters last year. Kihei Clark is the remaining starter who's coming back. And if anybody watched the tournament, Kihei's a fabulous, fabulous player. He's about 5'9", terrific point guard, but we have to fill in all the other positions. And so I think it's going to be a rebuild. It's going to be a fun year. We're going to be able to meet a lot of new players and watch them grow up.
All right. Well, we of course wish you the best of luck unless we're playing you. So,
I was going to say, I don't need to wish Duke any luck. You guys always have it.
Yeah. I mean, Virginia's done very well. Just for those who don't follow it, they've won the ACC like 2 or 3 out of the last 4 times. So awesome team. Anyway, let's get to our favorite topic of CMOs and talk about your pre-Darden experience. You were at P&G for a good stretch. What brand challenge did you enjoy the most while you were there?
What brand challenge? So I have a particular affinity. I had 3. I kind of split my P&G almost nearly a decade into 3 parts. The first part was working in the U.S. on brands like Tide, et cetera. The second part was working overseas in Eastern Europe. And then the third part was working on global strategy, where I was working in personal cleansing. 50% of the business was in Asia. And so I kind of had this U.S., European, Asian experience, if you will. Part of what I love was just learning about different consumers and trying to help create value for them. But the part of the job that I love the most is the strategic positioning side of it. It's what ultimately I ended up designing my elective around here. I'm writing a book on it. It's really how do you create positional advantage in the marketplace through science, a little bit of art, but a lot of science. And so I had a lot of passion in trying to figure out how to drive growth, not through price reductions or through gimmicks, but really trying to figure out how do we find the magic space in the marketplace that will unlock the potential of the business. So that's, it's not really a challenge. It is a challenge, but it's also the part of the job that excited me the most.
I hope we do talk more about strategy. I'm curious, when I was coming up in the business, in fact, I moved to New York specifically to work on packaged goods business, because at the time, if you were on the agency side, that was the place you could get the most training. And I really have to say my time on Listerine really informed sort of a strategic foundation that I've sort of lived off of for several decades. Do you think it's still true that a packaged goods marketing is sort of where is the training ground for future marketing stars?
So this is a complicated question. It's not an easy answer, but let me say the following. I did some research a few years ago because my MBA students were coming and saying, if I want to be a C-level marketer, like, where should I go? What's the best training? And I thought, it's a great question. So I started looking for data. There wasn't any. So I collaborated with an executive recruiting firm to go get data on this question. And specifically what we did is we surveyed executive recruiters who place C-level marketers. So we're looking for people who conduct searches for C-level marketers, and we asked a question around something like, it was open-ended. If you're looking at resumes and you're looking for somebody who's had terrific training in marketing, what company would you go to? And so then, of course, we analyzed the data, and the reality is, now this is a few years ago, I want to say maybe 3 years ago that we did this, CPG firms are still at the top, and I'll explain why. There are some retailing firms on there. Interestingly, no consulting firms. I found that interesting because we place a lot of consulting students out of Darden. And I want to say really no tech firms unless you want to consider, I think Amazon and Apple were on the list. But that's backward looking. So the first thing I would say is that's looking at people who were trained 20 and 30 years ago. That doesn't tell us who's getting training where today and how that helps propel them forward 20 to 30 years from now. And so I don't know kind of, if I had a daughter or a son, what I would probably tell them to do, and they said that they wanted to be a CEO, a growth-oriented CEO, I would tell them, go to consulting out of undergrad. After grad school, probably go to CPG if you want to go through the growth side. Then I would go and switch industries, and I would pop over to tech, I'd pop over to financial services, pop over to retailing. I'd go get multi-industry experience and a different view of problems. That I think would be I would recommend that because it'd be a lower risk. And let me explain a little bit, Drew, kind of why. The distinction is what marketers do in different industries or different companies. So in some companies, marketers create collateral. As one of my students, Jesse Wilkinson, said, he said they're arts and crafts marketers. In other companies, they drive strategy. They drive P&L. And there's everything in between. And so because the role of marketing is so varied, what really matters is how the company treats and values marketing. Right. Is it the driver of the business, or is it a sales support function? Is it a collateral development staff function? So the answer to the question is the role that you go into determines in part the type of training. But I think there are a lot of things changing. For example, B2B marketing is a really exciting time to be in it. They have tremendous responsibility according to my research. The challenges is still in some cases trying to get respect, but they oftentimes have broader scopes of responsibility than their B2C counterparts. I do think tech is an exciting place to be for marketing. It's changing dramatically. I think financial services and data-oriented companies are a spectacularly interesting place to be because of the nature of the data and the type of analysis that they can do. So, my answer is a little bit backward looking. I think it's going to morph over time, but the key is do CMO or do marketers learn how to be CEOs, or do they learn how to support the functions that become CEOs?
And that's a really interesting part of this this conversation. But I love the fact that you highlighted B2B as an interesting place to be. Of course, our live audience are all B2B CMOs, and so it would be good to sort of zero in on it. You mentioned that they struggled, B2B CMOs have a broad sort of range of responsibilities, but they struggle to get respect. Let's talk about that. What's the issue?
So let me, this is, when I was a CMO, GM, I wouldn't give this, but now that I've been trained as an academic, I always have to provide the limitation. So this is research that I conducted, surveys that I did a few years ago, where I'm looking at the role of the CMO and I'm trying to disaggregate it and understand why some are more successful than others, in large part due to things that are outside of their ability to control it, due to things other than competency, right? So that we can help CEOs better construct CMO roles, better understand how to hire. We can help CMOs do a better job of finding the right fit. And what I did is I took the data and I split it between B2C CMOs, B2B, and I ignored there was a group that also were hybrids that kind of were both. And so I wanted to look at those who were purely B2B versus those that were B2C. And then I looked at the number of responsibilities that they had, for example, the number and the degree. So did they have some degree of responsibility for pricing and product and digital and sales support, sales management, strategy, product, distribution, all sorts of different things. And then I looked at the degree the degree to which that they had responsibility for it. And if you control for company size, what I found was that generally the B2B CMOs, from my vantage point, had much richer jobs. They were touching more aspects of the company. They had broader responsibility, engaged in a lot more enterprise-wide types of things. There's another question I asked that had to do with status. And to what degree do you have, what's your status, or I use status and then I defined it in the research relative to the CFO, CIO, and other C-level leaders. And what I found is that generally the B2C CMOs felt that they had better status than the B2B. Now, obviously, this is over a large data set. On any one B2B person might have greater status than any randomly selected B2C person. It's just kind of an aggregate average. And that then, to me, gave me, I think, tremendous insight into some of the challenges that B2B CMOs might have, which is they have a larger mandate, that a company needs them to be involved in more things, but they're in some ways challenged to get the type of support or status or respect that they need to help deliver on some of those responsibilities.
Interesting. All right. Well, we're going to take a quick break, and then when we come back, I want to zero in on this balance, because it sort of feels like great responsibility, great opportunity, but there's some things some barriers, whether it's CEO respect or other things that we can dive into. So stay with us.
Did you know that Renegade Thinkers Unite was ranked number 2 of the top 10 podcasts for CMOs by Crackerjack Marketing? Wow, we're really honored. Now, we couldn't do that without amazing guests, and we've had some amazing CMOs on this show, and also terrific listeners like you all. If you like what we do here, please subscribe on your favorite podcast player. That way, you'll never miss an episode. Also, as a special thanks, I'd like to send you a free ebook on Renegade Thinkers. Now, for that, just email drew@renegade.com. Now let's get back to the show.
Okay, we're back. And my guest is Kim Whitler, and we've been talking about CMOs, particularly B2B CMOs. And it's amazing to me, they have all this responsibility, but part of the challenge, and we know this in any CMO role, is that you don't necessarily have control over the things that will really help you be successful. So you're expected to change the world, but you're not necessarily given everything that you need. And one of the things that we've talked about, Kim, is that, how about the support of the CEO and managing, having alignment on expectations? That seems to be a huge problem.
Yeah, I think it is. When I talk to different CMO groups, a lot of the frustration, this transcends all types of firms, is trying to figure out how to better manage the CEO. And again, in a separate set of research that I did with CMOs, I asked questions around the view that the CEO held of marketing, the value of marketing, the role of marketing, and there's a lot of variance. Some CMOs are fortunate; they have CEOs who really support and value marketing, and others don't. And, just like we know it's difficult to change consumer beliefs, if you have a CEO who comes from a company or an industry where marketing was not valued and the role of marketing was, I keep coming back to what Jesse said, arts and crafts, and all of a sudden he or she is now your boss, how do you change their mind? I mean, this is exceptionally difficult. I worked with, at one point, a CFO. This is the first time it had happened to me. Everybody that I'd worked with respected and valued marketing, and at one point, a peer of mine, the CFO, he was from Wharton and just fundamentally did not believe that marketing mattered. Not at all. And, trying to find a way to either work through him, work with him, or work around him, it ended up taking up a tremendous amount of my time to try to navigate that one challenge. And so, ideally, if I could wave a magic wand, all CEOs would understand the importance and value of marketing, and you guys wouldn't have these challenges, but unfortunately, they exist.
So let me ask you this then. So if you were looking for your next CMO job, clearly one of the questions that you would want to ask your CEO is, hey, you value marketing? And what does that mean? Because the CEO will, if you ask any CEO, they'll say, in an interview, do you value marketing? Of course, they're going to say yes. But what are sort of the hints that suggest, no, they really don't?
Okay. So here's what I would do. First of all, I like the context, which is I'm interviewing for a job. One of the things I would do is definitely look above me, and I wouldn't look just at the CEO. I'd also look at the board. That I found in my research that when you have a marketing experienced board member, it can really help facilitate both the status of marketing in the organization, because they're more likely to want the CMO to be at board meetings. That can be a good or bad thing, but they can help facilitate it. They also can help champion marketing. I've done some research in this area, and a it benefits the CMO when they have some sort of advocate or champion at the board level. So a few things, I'll tell you a few mental models. So in my research, what I found is I actually looked at firms, the background of the CEOs, and then the relationship with the strength of marketing in the firm. And what I found is that generally ops CEOs tend to have the worst marketing organizations in terms of how we define marketing capability. They're just associated with firms that aren't typically very good at marketing. Now, whether I can't tell you, is that because ops CEOs don't manage it very well, or they just happen to be, in charge of firms that have other strengths, like perhaps operations and not marketing. But generally, one of the heads up I would look at is if somebody comes from an operations background. And the reason is because it's so different from marketing. They're focused on driving bottom line profitability. Marketers are trying to figure out how to generate growth. It's like two different sides of the world. This is an average. Again, you can have very enlightened CEOs who have ops backgrounds. In my research, I found that finance background CEOs and marketing background CEOs almost looked similarly. Some were really good and had very strong marketing, and some were really bad. And so now it comes down to, so for me, one of the things I would look at is what type of function do they come from? Conceptually, a marketing background CEO, if they come from a company that has historically had good marketing, will value marketing more.
Right.
And when I say marketing, I kind of use it generically to say marketing and sales. So part of what I look at is what companies have they worked for? In those companies and in those industries, what has been the view of marketing? Right? That gives you, because that's the mental model in which they were raised. Right? So if you start off and you work in a nonprofit and marketing is really only a messaging, a campaign messaging organization, and perhaps they never even did a lot of data or analytics, then the type of marketing that they know is much more limited than if they worked at a Pepsi and the marketer was expected to be the CEO. So that experience base will affect then how they, basically what they believe a marketer should be.
So what's interesting
if that makes
here
sense.
is it does, and it certainly. I mean, as I've looked at, and this, by the way, has a huge impact on longevity as well. I mean, one of the interviews that I did was with Kathy Button-Bell, who's 21 years as the CMO at Emerson. Well, she's had the same CEO for the same, for that period of time, which is incredibly unusual. But so what we're essentially boiling it down to is a CMO can't be successful if the CEO doesn't give them the support they need. And I think I could get a lot of head nods from the folks that are present listening. So that's one. And it's almost as if what we're saying is, if they aren't, you probably can't succeed, period. And that's a hard, so all right. So then what would it take for a CMO to succeed with a skeptical CEO?
So I think, Drew, you bring up a good point, a minute ago about, can you ask directly, does the CEO value marketing? And if I can, before I jump into what would it take, if the CEO is skeptical, I think you can ask some questions. You can try to ferret this out. In addition to looking at the background of the CEO and what types of organizations and industries they've been raised in, you can also ask things like, how do you see, what is the role of the CMO in this organization? What responsibilities are assigned to him or her? Does it align with expectations? So if you say, Kim, I'll use an example. I want you to drive growth in this firm, but I don't touch product, I don't touch pricing, I don't even have the analytics arm, I don't have customer experience, then there's a huge disconnect between what they want you to do and the levers they're willing to give you. And I had a CEO at one point say, now, Kim, if you think marketers are going to have full accountability or full responsibility for all the levers, you're crazy. I said, I fully understand that. I absolutely get that. Marketers know that to some degree their job is an influence job. But on a scale of 0% to 100%, the farther up the scale you go, the more you put the marketer at risk and the more you actually risk your own growth outcomes.
Right.
Because what you're saying is the person I expect to drive growth actually doesn't have direct control of any of those levers. That's problematic. What I then did with the CEO is I said, what if a board came to you and said, I'm going to hold you accountable for firm performance, but we're going to have the innovation arm report up to the board? Would you sign up for that? And, the CEO, of course, would never sign up for that because he or she wants complete control over all of the levers for which they're accountable. So one of the things I would do is I would really look at the org chart. I'd try to understand what organizations are underneath marketing, what other organizations are lateral to me. I want to understand who controls what resources. I want to understand a little bit about managerial discretion and try to connect the dots between what the CEO says they want out of marketing and whether or not they're actually giving you the ability to influence those things. So that's what I would do actually in the interview. The other piece I talked about, I do ahead of time to try to look at some of the experience base. And then you ask the question, what would it take, to address a skeptical CEO? The simple answer here, because it's going to vary by circumstance, by industry, by company, by CEO, what the skepticism is around. If the skepticism is around, I've worked with CMOs and they've never done a good job, that's a tough thing to deal with. Or I worked in this company and marketing really wasn't valued. I'm now in a situation where I'm trying to figure out how to drive growth. I have a burning platform, and I don't know who to turn to if not the marketer, but yet I still have a little bit of skepticism. Those two circumstances are quite different in terms of being able to address what's causing the skepticism. But one of the things, to me, it always comes back to getting really clear on what success looks like and making sure that I believe I have the ability to deliver success. And then I think, so a lot of this is around a strategic plan. And a number of CMOs don't have strategic plans. But, I was trained at P&G. You always have a strategic plan for your business. You merchandise that plan with your peers and with your boss. You get alignment with your boss. And then, by the way, once you do that, you have a contract against which you can look at your performance at the end of the year. Of note, in my research, I find that a lot of CMOs actually aren't evaluated. They don't get formal reviews. Well, in the absence of a formal review, how do you help drive alignment with the CEO in terms of how you did last year, what you're trying to do in the next year, et cetera? So part of the addressing the skepticism, I think, is understanding what's causing it, and then I think it's coming up with a little bit of a plan to address it. Part of this could include being clear about what your expectations are, and then part of it is earning credibility. So if they come in skeptical, you have to kind of prove yourself, and a way to do that is through kind of financial metrics. That's an easier way to do it. Okay. Conceptually, harder in practice.
Right, and I want to get to those, but I have a couple questions for the audience in just a show of hands. How many of you have a strategic plan in place that's been approved by your CEO? Show of hands. Okay. That's about 3 out of 5. And then in terms of how many of you get annual performance reviews? Yeah, exactly. About 3.5 out of 5. It depends on the thing. That's interesting. Okay, so there's an issue. It's funny. I did want to self-aggrandize for a moment, if I will. The first chapter of my first book was for the first element of any CMO was setting expectations. And you can't. It's like if you don't get there, don't bother reading the other 63 elements, because if you don't have clear and aligned expectations with your boss, chances are you won't succeed in any job. Forget about it, whether it's a CMO or other job. But the other part of this is, how do you set expectations when you speak a different language than the CEO? And I think that's what we're going to talk about when we get back, so stay with us.
You've been listening to another great interview on Renegade Thinkers Unite with Drew Neisser. But the value doesn't end there. As a listener, you can download a free ebook from Drew, Renegade Thinkers, interviews with 11 trailblazing CMOs any business can learn from. Top marketing thought leaders and proven executives from Time Warner, American Express, and Chico's, and others. Get your free copy at renegadethinkersunite.com/ebook. For listeners only at renegadethinkersunite.com/ebook.
Okay, we're back, and my guest is Kim Whitler. We have been talking about this gap between the CEO and the CMO. I saw in one of your notes, Kim, that folks call it this fuzzy sort of what was it, the magical blah blah blah. Oh,
the arts and crafts.
Arts and crafts, yeah. Marketing as arts and crafts. So how does the CMO today, given there's a lot more marketing technology, there's a lot more data available, translate the metrics that that we look at as marketers, and we've been trained to look at things like brand health, even things like awareness, into, because I've certainly a CEO will say, you can't eat awareness. Because this is what this is about. It's about taking marketing metrics and turning them into business metrics, right?
Yes.
Okay, so how do we do that?
So, so there's a couple things I'd say out of the gates. One is we have to understand that not everything can be measured. Okay, and so there's always this assumption by some in, call it operations, where they can basically measure everything. that marketing should be universally, everything should be able to be measured. And I think part of it is understanding that not everything is measured. I start off with, again, every circumstance is a little different, but I start off with a fundamental question, which is, where does this fall in your strategic plan? So I entered a role at one point. I was CMO. It was a GM kind of CMO, kind of a quasi-hybrid role. And when I got there, the measurement system was terrible. My number one strategic priority out of 4 was to set up the dashboards, the data, the tracking, to go figure all of that out. If I had not had it on my strategic plan, it would have been an afterthought, and I would not have focused on it. And yet I knew that my success and actually, frankly, the ability to run the business was predicated on having good data and having good insight. And I didn't have it there. And I didn't have any ability to connect what we were doing with the business. So I made it the number one strategic priority. It just had to be that important. And I wonder where, for a lot of CMOs who say that this is an issue, where does it fall on their strategic plan? If you don't prioritize it, you won't invest the right time and the right resources in it. So the second thing is that once you if you say this is a strategic priority, I have to figure this out, then it comes down to what is it that you need to understand, what is it that you need to do, and what types of partners do you need to make this happen. So I will tell you that my ability to make progress on this issue at this company only happened because I had a terrific relationship with the CFO. Yep. He had a marketing mindset. I tended to come from more of a finance background. And so that I kept saying to him, I want to measure marketing. And you would have thought he wanted to fall out of his chair. You want to measure marketing? I said, yeah, I think we're wasting too much money in TV ads, but I can't prove it because I don't have the data right now. And so, of course, that's music to his ears. And then I said, I want to reinvest and find ways that we can invest in those things that are really driving growth, but we need to go figure out how to measure things, look at attribution modeling, et cetera. So the two of us partnered. I could not have done it alone. And one of the challenges, when marketers say that my CFO keeps saying, I want you to do X, I want you to measure things, I want to turn around to the CFO, or what I want my CMOs to do is to turn around to the CFO and say, well, at one level, if it's so easy, I'd love to get your insight on how to do this, right? So if it's so simple and it's just that I'm incompetent, I'm exaggerating here, then help me. Show me how to do it. If it's so easy to do this, and that's kind of my snarky answer. The reality is in many cases this is much more challenging than the type of measurement that other functions have to do. But if I had a difficult CFO, part of it would be, I think, saying, great, if it's so simple, I invite you to come in, I'll open up the books, we'll work together, let's figure out how to make this happen. The nice way to do it is, if you have a great CFO, is to say, hey, I really am trying to make marketing more accountable, and I would love your collaboration, your help to try to work on this, because we're connecting two languages. I need your help on your side. You need my help on my side. This is something we have to do together. And even better, if together you can convince the CEO that this is a strategic priority for the company. Now, all of a sudden, you can get some resources that you might need in different places to stitch the data together. You can make that happen faster. You may need consultants. You may need other resources outside of your purview. And if the CEO sees that you're making this a strategic priority, you're partnering with the CFO, and together you're trying to make this happen, then it might actually facilitate moving faster. So, this isn't easy, and I recognize, look, I've had good and bad relationships with CFOs. And at the point when I had a bad relationship, I would never have trusted him, to be honest. And so that's a whole separate problem. But in the other circumstances, it's a matter of partnering with them to try to figure out how to solve whatever problem you're trying to solve.
Now, and I love that, and I've had I saw a lot of the heads nodding in the audience as you were saying that, because I think they can imagine some have done mentor programs where they reverse. You teach me finance, I'll teach you marketing has been one approach. But I want to say, it's funny. I'm working on the chapter on metrics in book number 2, and I just wrote this down, which was, you will often hear from a CEO or a CFO, I don't want you spending a dime if you can't measure it. If you can't measure it, don't do it. And I think that's the stupidest thing in the world because it overemphasizes the things that you can measure and underestimates the things that you can. We know inherently that awareness matters. Just ask any sales guy who goes and knocks on a door and the company says, and the prospect says, "Where are you from again? I haven't ever heard of you." And we got heads nodding on that too. And it's interesting because we've got a range of brands that have a certain amount of awareness and some that don't. And those that don't desperately need awareness. Well, how do you build awareness? Often you have to do it in ways that are hard to measure. So anyway, I'm off on a tangent, but so we have this challenge, which is we want to be accountable, but not everything that we do will be overtly and directly measurable. And let me add some more context for the B2B audience. Average sales is 12 to 14 months on an enterprise basis. And often, Gartner's saying there's 11 different members of the buying committee right now. So you have now even more complex sell in this enterprise situation. So it feels like you can measure some things. You can measure leads that come in the door and the quality of those things. But the overemphasis on measurement to me also leads to the CMOs who are very good at demand generation, which is there's a premium on right now, and not so good in some of these other areas like brand. And again, one might say you can't eat brand, so leave that alone. Just focus on demand generation. Where are you right now when you think about, if you're a B2B CMO, and you talked about quick wins, would you put all your energy in demand generation?
Yeah, I have a little bit of a philosophy because I came in a couple of companies after CMOs who got fired because they were doing brand stuff. And so the way I look at it is a little different. I look at short-term versus long-term impact. And the one thing we know as marketers, if we're really good at brand building, and I want to start by saying not all marketers are, okay? We do a lot of things that actually don't help support kind of brand image growth over time. But if you're really good at it, you know that it's part of your responsibility. You have to do it. I always basically said this is below the line. This is stuff I will never get rewarded for. I do it because it's the responsible thing. I should do it. If I don't do it, nobody else will do it. But it's below the line, and I get credit for the short-term results because that's what my boss gets credit for. And so what I did is I said, somebody's got to do it. Somebody has to think about it. But it's not top of mind for the CFO. It's not top of mind for the CEO in many cases. And so I've got to make sure that I'm delivering the short-term needs of the business at the same time that I'm protecting the long-term health. And so, it's this either-or thing. I will tell you there's, and this will probably show my bias. In the research that I did, I asked CMOs to identify if they have predominantly analytical training, if they have predominantly creative training, or if they're somewhere in between. And I then looked at kind of the three distinct buckets, the hybrid CMOs, the creatives, and the analytical ones. And I looked at those that were associated with the strongest marketing firms. And interestingly, as you would expect, the hybrid CMOs are the strongest. Those who are kind of ambidextrous, right brain, left brain, they tend to be the strongest CMOs because they understand the quant side. They also understand the kind of creative side. But here's the shocking thing to me. The second strongest CMOs, right behind hybrids, barely a statistical significant difference, were the creative CMOs, and way down, I mean, there's this huge gap then between the creative CMOs and the quant CMOs. I did not believe the data. So that shows you my bias. I really felt like the quant CMOs would come in second. And so I reran the data multiple times. And I'm like, this can't be right. So then finally, when I accepted that the data was the data, I stepped back and said, all right, what's going on here? What is it that could, I don't have the data, I don't have the research, but I have a hypothesis. And I drew on my experience with students in the classroom and with my interviews with CMOs. The more quantitative the CMOs that I've interviewed, the more they're very dismissive in a bit of a haughty way about old-fashioned creative CMOs. Like they look down on them. So they don't see the value in that skill. They look at it as an old-fashioned, not important, not valued skill today. In contrast, without mentioning names, I've interviewed a number of kind of ad agency CMOs. They always have tremendous respect for the quant side. They make sure that they have people around them that shore up that potential deficiency, but they don't look down on it. Then I think about my students in class. I have my poets and my quants, and everybody knows that quant skills matter. It is unclear to me that the quants understand that strategic and conceptual thinking skills matter.
Interesting.
And so what I start wondering, my hypothesis is that quant CMOs may have a bit of a hubris and a blind spot, and they create teams of mini-me's because they value that skill so heavily and they don't see the value in the other side, whereas the other folks are hit over the head daily with how important quant stuff is. And so they shore it up if they don't have it. And the way that I explain this to folks is the quant side is telling you what to do. It helps give you insight into where you need to play, what you should do, etc. But the creative side helps you change consumer behavior. If you can't change consumer behavior, you're not going to have an effective marketing program. And so you need both sides, and the creatives know how to do that, but the quants and so forth have to help point them in the right direction. Right. And so you need both.
That's fascinating. And of course, that's somewhat music to my ears. It's sort of the difference between how and why, one could argue. And it's fascinating. And I certainly, any CMO that I talk to, if they ask, how should we staff, if they're creative, is, make sure number 2 is a data person. You can't survive at data. But if you are a data person, I've seen this over and over again, particularly in Silicon Valley, is they're really good at quantitative demand gen, but they're not necessarily doing great work that really moves the business forward. They're optimizing Google AdWords. It's a different level of marketing. They are not changing the business. They are not impacting employee or customer understanding or appreciation of the business. All right, so we have a bit of a surprise. This is just part 1 of my interview with Kim Whitler. There actually is going to be a part 2. And in part 2, we will hear from the CMOs who you heard at the top of the show. They will get a chance to ask their questions. And I think you're really going to enjoy the second part, hopefully as much or even more as the first. So until next time, which won't be very long, keep those Renegade thinking caps on and strong.
This has been Renegade Thinkers Unite, but it doesn't end there. Just go to renegadethinkersunite.com for more and subscribe to the show. That way, you'll never miss an episode. We'll talk with you next time on Renegade Thinkers Unite.